Well, good morning, church. I'm Robert Carter. I'm a scientist. I work for Creation Ministries International. You'll hear a lot about me and my ministry in the next hour, so I'm going to hold off on that. I've got too much material to present to you in the time that I had been allotted. I've got about half of my slides blacked out already, and I'm sure I'm going to be skipping at the end just because there's too much interesting and informative and amazing things to say. What I'm going to attempt to do is just ask a bunch of questions. And let's see if we can answer those questions. Let's see if we can answer them biblically and scientifically. And let's see how these questions challenge us. I'm going to ask some easy questions, especially up front, and then some difficult questions, especially toward the end. And we're going to get to the end. Did dinosaurs have feathers? Did birds evolve from dinosaurs? But before we get there, we have to lay down a tremendous amount of groundwork. So, I want to tell you that a lot of what I'm about to present to you has already appeared in the pages of our Creation magazine. You can also find a lot of this information on creation.com, our website. In fact, if you type in dinosaurs, there'll be a dinosaur Q&A page with a couple of hundred articles. We're constantly adding more information on this topic, revising what we have, and improving our materials. And there's some really good stuff there for you when and if you're interested. Okay, ready? First question. What's a dinosaur? It's a good question. What makes a dinosaur different than all the other reptiles? Well, first of all, they have different holes in their skull. Second of all the reptiles alive today, except for snakes, their legs stick out to the side. But dinosaurs, they stood up. They bore their weight on their legs, kind of like the way we do. So that separates them into a completely different group. They are a unique group of reptiles. Did you just learn something? Yeah. Okay. But here's the challenge. What happened to the dinosaurs? They died. They're not around today. In fact, I wrote an article on creation.com, dinosaurs are almost certainly extinct. Well, for a long time as a creationist, I entertained the thought that there were living dinosaurs. And I read all the articles from other creationists, and Mokele Mbembe is this thing in Central Africa in the rainforest is supposedly still alive. And there are reports there, and those reports needed to be investigated. But none of the reports have been confirmed. And as a scientist, I can't submit to the public information that can't be validated. At best, I can say, I want this to be true. I'm going to put it in a box. I'm going to put a little bow on it that says open in 5 years and put it in the back shelf of my mind. It's not something I'm going to be talking about in public because it's not something I can substantiate. And we now have satellites that cover the entire globe. You can see deer and sheep and cows in Google Earth. You can't see any dinosaurs. Just saying. So we have a giant mystery, though. The evolutionary community will tell us dinosaurs died out from what? What's the story we hear all the time? A big asteroid. Does anyone know when that happened? Well, let's put this in the evolutionary context. Now, biblical context, the Earth's only a few thousand years old. Evolutionary context, the Earth is billions of years old, and supposedly 65 million years ago, a big meteor hit the Yucatan Peninsula, caused so much ash to go up into the atmosphere that it killed off the dinosaurs. That is the story. There is some evidence for a meteor strike. There's some contrary evidence, but there is some evidence for a meteor strike, but I have no problem with meteors hitting the Earth during the flood. I have no problem with that at all. However, what is difficult about the story is explaining why the turtles survived, why the crocodiles survived, and why the butterflies survived. And you put in that kind of a context, you realize the big meteor story is interesting, but there's some explaining that still has to be done. I mean, and the strangest thing is that dinosaurs were a diverse group of organisms. There were big ones, there were little ones, there were fast ones and slow ones, there were plant eaters and meat eaters that lived all over the world, and they're all dead. And yet, tons of mammals survived, tons of insects survived. In fact, when you look at the fossil record, Most of the things in the fossil record, you know what it is because it's still alive today. Horseshoe crabs, crinoids, corals, sponges, dragonflies. You look at them, you know exactly what it is. The rule of thumb in the fossil record is when something appears, it stays pretty much the same, and it's either alive today or it's gone extinct. All right. Who can name a species of dinosaur? Triceratops, T-Rex. Oh, pterodactyl. Pterodactylus is not actually a dinosaur. The flying reptiles are another unique group of reptiles that are also extinct. So that's a whole other subject. That's very interesting, though. Do you think between us we could name 20 species? 50? 100? A million? Okay, how many species were there? How many species of dinosaurs do you think? Dozens, hundreds, thousands, or millions? Who says millions? Thousands, dozens. Who's not going to answer my question? The answer is a few hundred. It's actually not hard to get a pretty good grasp of most of the dinosaur diversity. There's only a few hundred named species, and a lot of those species, they look really similar. This is 11 of the ceratopsid dinosaurs. Microceratops is not here, Protoceratops is not here. This is just 11 ceratopsid dinosaurs. Now, but look at them. They all look similar, right? They have a horn, they have a frill, they have a beak. There's something ceratopsid-like about this group of animals. And yet they have 11 different genera, not just 11 different species here. But this raises another problem, and that is, as a biologist, how do you think I define what a species is? I use what's called the biological species concept. If two things can interbreed, they're the same species. These are all dead. We cannot do cross-fertilization experiments with dinosaurs. So let's compare something that we're very familiar with to see if maybe this is one or many species. And just consider dogs. This is the largest dog in the world standing next to the smallest dog in the world. Look at the great amount of morphological diversity within one known species. And consider this. If a paleontologist found the bones of these animals in the fossil record, there's no way they would put them into the same species. Because Charles Darwin told us that species change very slowly over millions of years. That's funny because these breeds didn't even exist 100 years ago. What's a species? It depends on who you ask. And that's a problem because we're talking about dinosaurs, we're talking about fossil record, we're talking about things we cannot actually tangibly experiment on. We can only see them in rocks. And usually it's just the bones. We don't have, you can't listen to a dinosaur make a sound. You can listen to a dog's bark and say, oh, yeah, that sounds like a little dog. That sounds like a big dog. But it's basically the same bark, sort of. I just read a bunch of papers on cat sounds. And these evolutionists are analyzing cat vocalizations in the same way they analyze human speech, using the same tools, same computer programs, same statistics. And they keep on figuring out that cats make random sounds. They have no language. But looking at the bones of a cat versus the bones of a human, you would not know that humans are radically different than cats. You can't know that. And so I'm looking at the bones of these dinosaurs, and I'm thinking that there's a lot of diversity within known species. There's something dinosaur-like about, or ceratopsid-like about these dinosaurs. I'm thinking that there are a lot fewer species here than the evolutionist wants us to think. We're okay with that? Okay. If you take those thoughts and apply them to the fossil record, there's only about 50 basic kinds of dinosaur. We have the ceratopsids, the duck-billed hadrosaurs, the ankylosaurs are like little tanks with the clubs on their tails. We have the long sauropods, the stegosaurs, and then the meat-eating theropods, which is a challenge. Because doesn't the Bible say that God created all things to eat plants? Sure does. First page of the Bible. And yet we have things like T-Rex. How would that dinosaur have originally been described? As an herbivore, a carnivore, a scavenger, or an omnivore? Who says the fierce predator stalking the Mesozoic plains looking for his prey? Rawr. That's the picture we're given, right? But look at the question. How would he have originally been described? Let's apply what Jesus did when he got asked trick questions all the time. You read the Gospels. What does Jesus do when someone asks him a trick question? He asks a question in return. This question, how would he have originally been described? According to whom? The evolutionists who discovered him and gave him the name Tyrant Lizard King? That's what Tyrannosaurus Rex means. Or the Bible? Look at Genesis chapter 1. God says to Adam, "See, I've given you every herb that yields seed which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed, it shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, to everything that creeps in the ground in which there is life, I've given every green herb for food." And it was so. All right, Christian, does the Bible unequivocally say that God created all animals to eat plants? Do all animals eat plants today? Do we have a problem that needs to be answered? So let's answer it. If dinosaurs specifically were created to eat plants, why do some eat meat? Well, first, we turn to a passage in Genesis chapter 3, which I'll be talking about a lot in the next hour. God gave Adam one rule. He said, don't eat the fruit from that one tree. That's all he had to not do. But Adam did it anyway. And because of that, God curses the ground. He says to Adam, "Cursed is the ground because of you, and pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face shall eat bread till you return to the ground," etc. This is called the curse. It's a very important passage for biblical Christianity. This explains where suffering and death come from. This explains why Jesus had to die to pay for sin. There's a lot of deep theology here. But once sin, suffering, and death are in the world, we have animals that are laboring under that curse also. And what does a hungry animal do? He eats whatever he can find. Think about what your ancestors used to eat. Have you ever studied history and starvation periods? And when you're hungry, you'll eat anything. Ew. Well, when the chestnuts died across the eastern seaboard in the U.S. about 100 years ago, there were reports of chipmunks eating roadkill. Little cute little chipmunks that eat the little acorns. They run out on the road, probably eating the last chipmunk that tried to eat, got run over also. But in other words, a hungry animal is going to eat. So apply that to a big animal with pointy teeth. And yet, we got to be careful, very careful, because science changes. Science is fickle. Science will rip the rug right out from underneath you when you're not paying attention. And there's been some classic case of that, and this is one of them. Several years ago, we had an article on creation.com, vegetarian theropod dinosaurs. Now, the theropods, what's that? That's the dinosaurs that are like this. That's a theropod. The meat eaters tend to have those short little front legs and a big jaws and big teeth. And yet, back in the day, they found a skeleton in a rock. They would chisel the skeleton out, and they'd bring the bones back and set it up in the museum and charge people money to go see the dinosaur skeletons, and that's really cool stuff. But now they've gotten more sophisticated. They have destroyed multiple world-class dinosaur fossil sites by digging through the little dinosaurs, the plant material, the mammals, the birds, just to get at the big dinosaur bones. And now paleontologists are going back to some of those sites 100 years later, and they're like, it's all ruined. Because the old school, the new school is a little more sophisticated. And one thing they've done is they realize when they see a dinosaur bone in a rock, they can step back, and sometimes they can see the outline of the animal's body that stained the rock because he was buried entire. And then when you realize that, you say, wait a minute, if that's the animal, there's his heart, there's his liver, there's his stomach. And you can see in the rock, the soft tissues have been petrified. And once they realized that, they started cutting out the rock that contains a stomach and polishing it and looking at the stomach contents of dinosaurs. And they realized most of the theropods, their stomachs are packed with plant materials. So despite the pointy teeth, we now know what they ate because we can see it in their stomachs. Oh. And yet, we know some theropods were eating animals because we see crushed up bones in some stomachs, baby dinosaurs, birds. There's evidence of carnivory, but most of what we thought were carnivorous dinosaurs weren't. So where did the carnivores come from? Well, consider this. What does a black bear eat? Well, when it can't get into a garbage can, black bear's diet is like 99% plant material. What's a polar bear's diet? Fish, seals, occasionally a person. A polar bear's diet is like 99% meat. And yet, they had the same claws. They had the same teeth. A black bear can take a blueberry twig, put it in its mouth and go, broop, and leave the leaves on the blueberry stem and have all the blueberries in his mouth. Using the same teeth, a polar bear can rip into tough seal skin. You've heard of the word adaptation, right? Have you ever heard the word exaptation? That's when you take a tool and use it for something it wasn't designed for. Guys, you've all done this. Your wife asks you to hang up a picture. So you're like, I'm the man. You go into your tool shop and you pull out that little plastic tray with the little hanger things for the sheetrock. And it's got the little plastic thing and a screw. You know what I'm talking about? And you go up to the bedroom and you're setting up and you have to poke a hole in the sheetrock and you realize you forgot your hammer. Every time, right? So what do? You take your screwdriver, you turn it around, and you go pop, 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 and you poke the little thing through the sheetrock, right? How many people have not done that? My point is this. A screwdriver is a great hammer in some circumstances, but it wasn't designed to be a hammer. Bear teeth are great for carnivores, but they weren't designed for carnivory. Exaptation, using a tool that was designed for something else to do something new. If you apply hunger, if you apply competition, and you apply the fact that a lot of animals have things that can do many different things, I think we can explain the rise of carnivory without having to resort to evolution in millions of years. Just saying, I like that thought a lot. But we know that dinosaurs were eating meat. Consider this. This is the tailbone of a duck-billed dinosaur, a hadrosaur, with a T-Rex tooth stuck in it. And the bone healed up around the tooth, meaning the animal survived the T-Rex attack and walked around the rest of his life with a tremendous amount of pain because he had a tooth in his spine. Ugh. But that's cool. All right. Next question. Without going into too much detail, because I only had an hour to do this, let's assume God created a few thousand years ago, Adam and Eve are real, dinosaurs lived on Earth with people, and dinosaurs were alive at the time of Noah's flood. Okay, that's a lot of stuff I just said, but I don't have time to get into all of that. Let's just assume that's true. If that were true, then a lot of things would have died during Noah's flood, and we should have evidence for that. So, is there evidence that dinosaurs died in a big flood? You never hear it on National Geographic Channel. Is there evidence? Absolutely, and it stares us in the face all the time. Remember the first Jurassic Park movie from the 80s? Remember the opening scene? They're in a tent out in the desert, and they have this thing goes boom, and they run over the TV screen, and it goes whoosh, 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 because, old computers are slow. Whoosh, 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 and they show a picture of the velociraptor, and he's like this. when we find an intact dinosaur skeleton, they're almost always in that pose. It's weird. The paleontologist calls it the dead dinosaur posture. But when a dog dies, it doesn't do that. Squirrels and cats and cows, lizards don't do that when they die. Dinosaurs do. And it's a mystery. It was a mystery for a long time. But then several years ago, some scientists were studying chickens. And they realized if you take a dead chicken and put it in water, it does that. And they scratched their head and said, oh, a lot of long-necked animals, long-tailed animals also, they have a structure. It's called the ligamentum elasticum. The elastic ligament. It's a rubber band. It runs from the base of the skull down the spine and down the tail. So a chicken doesn't need muscles to hold his head up. He has a rubber band to hold his head up. Boing, boing, boing. That's really good design. But what happens when you drown that animal? Well, the rubber band is still pulling, but the chicken doesn't weigh as much because it's in water. And the natural response is boing, and he curls up. And now the evolutionary paleontologists themselves are saying the dead dinosaur posture is evidence of drowning. Wow. Almost always when we find an intact dinosaur, it looks like it died in water. In fact, they're very often buried with fish and clams. Except the ankylosaurs. They're not curled up like this. But the ankylosaurs are like a tank. They have a hard back with all these bones in it, and we usually find them upside down. Why? Because when you take something that's top-heavy and drown it, it flips over as it sinks. So even the ankylosaurs are evidence of drowning. All right, next question for you. Are dinosaurs in the Bible? Well, the word's not in the Bible because we didn't have that word until the 1800s. So the ancient Hebrews could not have written the word dinosaur. They did have a word for dragon. It's called tanin. Usually that's translated jackal or something like that, because translators, they really struggle over that word. They don't want to put the word dragon in the Bible. King James felt free to do that. Modern translators, they don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. But there are other passages in the Bible that are strange. Specifically, my favorite is in Job chapter 40. You realize that Job is a lawsuit, right? You know that? Job sued God, and God appeared in his own defense. And what did he do? He put Job in his place. He asked him all these questions specifically about science. You know the song, "The heavenly storehouse is laden with snow." You know that song, right? I butchered it, but he asked them all these science questions. And then he ends with this one. Actually, he ends with the next chapter, but this one, Job chapter 40. God says, "Behold, behemoth." What is a behemoth? Have you trained yourself that when you see a non-English word in the Bible, you translate it in your head? Have you trained yourself yet? Okay, church, that's a classic one. You have to define what that means. Well, behemoth, Hebrew, beast of beasts. It's the plural of majesty. It's in the plural as in this is the biggest, baddest one of all. The beast of beasts, which I made as I made you. Obviously a reference to creation. He eats grass. Oh, cool, he's an herbivore. He's got strength in his loins and power in the muscles of his belly, so he's really strong, and he hangs his tail like a cedar. Now, I don't care which translation you want to use, they all have that phrase, like a cedar. To us, this doesn't make much sense. There are cedar trees around here, right? Are they impressive? Not really. I mean, Georgia, they grew up in old fields and stuff like that. They're little scrubby little things. And yet, to Job, the largest tree that he could have seen would have been a cedar. The cedars in the Middle East are the biggest trees. If the Bible had said he's got a tail like a sequoia, you would know exactly what that means. But the cultural context for us Americans, we kind of miss the like a cedar thing. He's got a big old tail. That's what God's telling him, to use a southern phrase. And so we cannot say authoritatively that dinosaurs are in the Bible. Can't do that. However, if you want to take a passage in Job 40 here and compare it to all the known species of animals alive today, and all the known species of animals that have extinct in the past, well, the sauropod dinosaurs fit that description very well. They're big, they're very strong, they eat plants, and they've got a giant tail. So you see what I'm doing? In science, you can very rarely make an absolute statement. In fact, I don't know any in science that you can make. We have laws of science, like the law of gravity. Well, it's a law because no one's ever seen anything contradict gravity, and if we found a contradiction, it wouldn't make any sense in everything else we know. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. It's just we've never experienced a contradiction to the law of gravity. So here, we can put our knowledge of dinosaurs and our understanding of Scripture and compare them and say, there's a pretty good case, but you can't say it absolutely. You're comfortable with that? Okay. Next question. Does Noah have a problem? Oh my. There are dinosaurs that would have a hard time fitting in this room and could never get through one of the doors to get into this room. How does Noah going to take two of each of the dinosaurs and put them on the ark? Well, let's answer this with several possibilities. First, not all dinosaurs are gigantic. Within those 50 basic kinds of dinosaurs, there are little sauropods. There are sauropods that are smaller than a pony, full grown. And then there are sauropods that are 90 feet long. There are theropods, like, I don't know if this is a theropod, but Compsognathus is a chicken-sized dinosaur, fully grown. So not all of them are big. Second, the largest land animals ever to walk this planet came out of an egg smaller than a football. Oh. So maybe Noah brought hatchlings. Maybe he brought babies. Maybe he brought teenagers. He doesn't have to take great-great-granddaddy Apatosaurus who's near the end of his life. Okay? Not only that, how many dinosaurs would Noah have had to take on the ark? 2 of each kind. How many basic kinds? 50? What's 2 times 50? About 100. Whatever. So even if he has to take the big ones, there's only about 100-ish. There's plenty of room, even for the big ones. And yet, I don't have any reason to think he took the great big ones. It's really not a problem. There's multiple ways to explain the issue, multiple ways to answer it. If any one of them is true, the puzzle is solved. It's not that big a deal. And yet, we still have to ask the question, what happened to the dinosaurs? Have you ever considered that the largest land animals that have ever lived are all extinct? The biggest representatives we see are in the fossil record. The 6-foot-tall penguins, the giant bears, etc. They're gone. Why? Well, if you think about being large, you need more food. You can't survive a drought as easily as a small version. If you think about being large, you have to grow bigger before you reproduce. Therefore, let's say like in the condor population, this is the Andean condor, extinct, much, much, much larger than a living California condor. But just mathematically, if you had a diverse species where you had some were bigger and some were smaller in the same species, and the bigger ones had to wait maybe 10 years before they reproduce, but the smaller ones only reproduce after 2 years. By the time that big one lays its first egg, the smaller ones have 10,000 descendants. And so mathematically, all species should be driving to be smaller. If for some reason dinosaurs couldn't do that, they might not have made it. If they had to be big before they reproduce, there's all these problems with largeness. Now, again, I didn't answer that question either. I don't know what happened. I just know that there are reasons for them to not be here, and I know they're not here. I believe. I use the word no. As a scientist, you can't do that. It's funny. Have you ever heard a scientist say, "We now know"? You know what that means? I was wrong yesterday. When they say that, my opinion changed, or I was corrected on something. But scientists usually are the smartest people in the room, and they hate to say, I don't know. It is the funniest thing. They do not like to admit ignorance. Some of them are contrite. I like those guys a lot. But some of them, man, the most arrogant, confident people you'll ever meet is a scientist. And, dude, do you really know what you're talking about? Or are you just making it look like you know what you're talking about? And we get frustrated with them, don't we? Especially in politics. All right, next question. Is there any evidence that man lived with dinosaurs? I mean, if the biblical story is correct, and the Bible doesn't necessarily talk about dinosaurs by name, but we know they existed from the fossil record, and if they did, then they were on Earth with humans. Do we have any evidence for that? Well, I know a lot of creationists bring up evidence. Some of it I'm not comfortable with. So I'm going to just give you a couple of my favorites and leave the more speculative ones to the side. This is absolutely one of my favorites. This is the tomb of a bishop who is buried in Carlisle, England, 800 years ago, 600 years ago, 15th century. And on his tomb, in that rectangle, some of it's broken away and worn down, but the surviving parts of that rectangle are carved in brass. These animals, look, there's a bat, there's a dog, there's a fish, there's a bird. Does anyone disagree with me? Did the person carving these things know what he was carving? And yet, right next to those things, this looks like two sauropod dinosaurs with their necks wrapped around each other. I know it's worn down, but notice they're upright and their tails are horizontal, not dragging on the ground like older depictions. And the guy on the left, I know you can't see it, but he has two spikes on his tail. That's funny because we have found two species of sauropod dinosaurs that have spikes on his tail. This is Spinosaurus. Man, that's hard to say. And this motif of these sauropod-like things wrapping their necks around each other. Maybe they're fighting. You know how giraffes, the males will fight each other? They take their necks and they whack the other male with their horns. In a lot of reptiles, they'll kind of wrap up each other and the strongest one wins and the other guy goes away. This looks like a very reptilian behavior. And this is on a Mesopotamian cylinder seal from ancient times. Now, if these guys look a little distorted, like their necks are a little too long, consider Tanistropheus. Just saying. And then the jungles of Cambodia. Angkor Wat was at one point the largest city on earth. It was the head of Khmer Empire. It is an amazing, the hydrology, what they did with the water system in the city is unbelievable. These guys were awesome engineers. But then the giant drought happened and the city collapsed and they got covered in forest. And archaeologists have been going hacking back the jungle, and they're exposing things like this one temple. And this temple, there's this one door frame. And that door frame, there's a demon, a water buffalo, a couple of people, and then this thing. What's your first response when you see that? Sure looks like a stegosaur to me. Now, it's not perfect. Proportionally, he's a little bit wrong. His head is too big. I don't see the spikes on his tail, but his tail looks like it's cut off. But he's standing up like a dinosaur should. And around the corner from this, someone recently realized there's another stegosaur-like critter that looks even more like a stegosaur. And yet, it can't be, because we didn't discover stegosaurs until the 1800s, and this is from centuries before that. And there's no record in ancient history of paleontologists assembling dinosaur skeletons. They knew of dinosaur bones in some places, but no one, as far as we know, ever assembled one and said, oh, look at this. This is how the animal looked and behaved. In fact, even when we started discovering them in the 1800s, they put the pieces in the wrong parts, in the wrong places. Until they said, oh, no, it goes here. And they had to revise their skeletons over time before we had a really good understanding of what these animals looked like. So, is there evidence of man lived with dinosaurs? Yeah. Not a lot, but it is there. How many of you have seen a picture like this? The age of dinosaurs. A world dominated. This is the end of the Mesozoic era. We have all these dinosaurs. Notice there's no mammals in the picture. There's no birds in the picture. There's no grass in the picture. All three of those things are wrong. This is false. Greatly false. Specifically grass. When I was in graduate school, I was taught that grasses didn't evolve till 35 million years ago. That's pretty recent in the evolutionary scheme. That's 30 million years after dinosaurs supposedly went extinct. That's when grasses appeared. And it was weird because grasses cover the world today. Everything from the stuff in your yard to the bamboo forests of Southeast Asia is grass. And yet, remember the story of the dinosaur stomachs? Well, what happens at the other end of the stomach is very interesting. How would you like this for a job? What do you do? I study dinosaur poop. Yes, there are coprolite experts who they go around the world looking for dinosaur dung. And we have hundreds of thousands of petrified dinosaur dung piles. Which is strange because that stuff doesn't last very long. I mean, you've never walked out in your backyard and tripped over some fossilized cat mess, right? No, this stuff goes away really quickly. In a matter of days, it's just gone. And we have hundreds of thousands of petrified dinosaur dungs. And sometimes you know what species it came from. And they have different shapes, and you can tell a lot about the behavior of the animal, strangely, from what they did at the end there. But what they've done is cut them in half and polish them. That's a fun job. And then looking at them under the microscope, and what they realize is that all of the species, all the major families of grasses are found in dinosaur dung, and nowhere else in the fossil record until recently. So the fossil record is fickle. Some things are preserved, some things aren't. Some things we know were together, and we now know they were together. In the past, they thought they weren't. Evidence of absence. No, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Sorry, got that backwards. All right. We have to realize that story, that picture I showed you, is radically wrong. They have found as many species of mammals buried with dinosaurs as they found species of dinosaurs. I remember being taught, even up through graduate school, oh yeah, there were a few mammals alive in the time of the dinosaurs, but they're mouse-like creatures. And after the dinosaurs went extinct, that's when the great mammalian radiation happened and all the mammals evolved from some mouse-like creatures that lived with dinosaurs. Same with birds. That's no longer true. That story has been thrown out because we found examples of Mesozoic squirrels, platypuses, that jawbone, that second picture from the left there, that groove in the bottom of the jaw, that's for the giant nerve that runs to the bill of the platypus. The only difference between this, that's platypus teeth. That is clearly a platypus jaw. But it's about twice as big as a modern platypus. That's the difference. They found a badger-like creature with a baby dinosaur, Psittacosaurus, in his stomach. A beaver-like creature preserved with his hairs. A hedgehog-like creature. Now, hedgehogs are unique. There's no other animal in the world like a hedgehog. Hedgehog hairs are unique. They're not a porcupine. It's a hedgehog. They have different hairs. No other animal has a hair like a hedgehog. That thing was petrified with his hairs. It's the size and shape of a hedgehog, has hedgehog hairs, but do you see the MA on that slide? That means mega annum, or millions of years ago. In the evolutionary context, these things, 120 million years ago, 130 million years ago, 164 million years ago, badger-like creatures lived in the evolutionary model before dinosaurs even evolved. Have you ever seen the movie Hidden Figures? Right? The African-American lady doing the calculations for NASA that got the men to the moon. Cool movie. Well, there's a guy a couple years ago, he's dropping his wife off at that facility where those ladies worked in Maryland. And he just looks over in the woods and he sees a rock. I think it was probably something they dug up and threw into the woods as they're building the building. And he just walks over there and he makes this world-class fossil discovery. It's a rock about this big. And on that rock are pterosaur footprints, sauropod footprints, nodosaur footprints, nodosaur coprolites, a bone from the skin of a nodosaur, and mammal footprints. So not only did dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and mammals live at the same time, they were living on top of each other and leaving footprints in the same muddy little puddle or something that then hardened and petrified to form that stone. That's cool. Amazing. Okay, let's get into the question as I wrap up here, if I can. Did dinosaurs have feathers? That's a good question. You know what my answer is? I don't care. The Bible doesn't say dinosaurs did not have feathers. So if dinosaurs have feathers or not, I'm perfectly comfortable with either answer. Fair enough? But let's dig into this, because I don't think they had feathers. But let's dig into it. First, we have to acknowledge birds have feathers, right? Birds in the fossil record also have feathers. Feathers can be preserved in stone. Ooh, that took us a long time to actually acknowledge this and say, yes, soft things can be preserved in stone. It's contrary to Darwin's views. Darwin said, in fact, he said, no organism wholly soft can be preserved. He wrote that in The Origin of Species. And he said that because he thought the animal dies and very slowly and very gradually is buried, and therefore only the hard parts would be preserved. That's not true. This is Confuciusornis. You see the long tail feathers? By the way, there's a giant difference between a tail of a bird and the tail of a reptile. You've eaten chicken. What's on the rear end of a chicken? Does he have a tail? He's got a couple little bones, about that long. It's called the pygostyle. And that's it. That's the tail of a chicken. If he has a tail, it's just long feathers sticking off this little bony thing. A reptile has a long bony tail. So does your dog. You ever get whacked by your golden retriever or your lab right across the knee? Oh man, you stupid dog. Why does that hurt? Because it's an extension of the spinal cord. You have your vertebra, and they keep on going down into the tail, and that's what the dog is wagging. So a lot of animals have bony tails. Birds do not. But this guy clearly has feathers. The strange thing is, though, he has teeth and his claws on his wings. You know that the wing of a bird is his hand, right? And, well, fingernails, claws are kind of in the same place, and these guys have claws at the termination of the finger bones. And yet, there's a modern species of bird who has claws on his wings. This is called the Hoatzin, or the stink bird of South America. Amazingly, there's a David Attenborough documentary where I swear the cameraman shook the branch and knocked the bird into the river. But anyway, the baby Hoatzin is about to drown. Oh no. And the bird is floating down the river going cheep, 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 cheep. And he grabs onto an overhanging branch and he goes, and he climbs out of the river using his claws. Fully functional wing claws in a modern bird. Something else weird about this bird. You know when you eat chicken and you want to get the white meat off the bone, you kind of dig under there. There's a keel on the sternum of a bird. That keel actually makes a triangle. An attachment point for the muscle makes the muscles a lot stronger so they can fly. You're not going to be able to fly. Your chest muscles will never be strong enough. But the bird has that keel that helps them a lot. Reptiles have a flat breastbone. Some of the ancient birds had a flat breastbone. The Hoatzin has a flat breastbone. So it's retaining some features of ancient birds. I think this is actually one of those ancient birds from the fossil record that's still alive today, because it fits all the characteristics. But here's another bird. This is Hunxionornis longcresta. He's got a beak. Oh, what's the difference between a beak and a jaw? Well, birds can do this, right? You can't. You can only move your lower jaw. Birds can move their upper beak. That's a big difference between beaks and jaws. This guy's got a beak. He has long wings, long legs, and that smudge down there on the bottom, that's probably the color from his tail feathers. That's cool. This is Enchiornis huxleyi, named after a good friend of Charles Darwin, Huxley. Can you see the feathers? Can feathers be preserved in the fossil record? How about this one? I'm not going to even try to pronounce that. It's another bird with long, beautiful feathers. Here's another one. A tuft of feathers with bones. Here's another one. Oh, this one's cool. Why? Because, come on now. This is the only bird ever found with a petrified egg inside it. But the strangest thing is the egg has multiple layers of eggshell. If you took a barnyard chicken and chased it for several days and never let it sit and lay its egg, every day it's going to put another layer of eggshell on. You can actually get a multi-layered eggshell if you wanted to, torture a chicken. But this bird apparently was not able to find a place to lay its egg, and then it died, and that evidence is preserved. Just amazing. Here's another one. This is incredibly important. I know it's hard to see, but his lungs are preserved. And the reason this is important because a bird lung is radically different than a reptile lung. When you breathe, we have a diaphragm here, we go, and we pull air into our lungs, and the air only goes in about this far. And then the oxygen has to diffuse down into the bottom part of the lungs. And the carbon dioxide has to diffuse out before we can breathe it out. It's not a very efficient system. It works great for us, but this is why we can't run a 1 hour marathon. 2 hour marathons, not one. Isn't that the rate, right? I thought, man, that's fast. Whew. I remember watching the Olympics in Los Angeles when I was in high school and I was in cross country. And Joan Benoit, the female gold medalist of the LA marathon, she ran every mile faster than I've ever run a mile. Anyway, looking at bird lungs though. First, reptile lungs. Reptiles don't have a diaphragm. They use their liver. They go, that's how they breathe. It's called a hepatic pump. They use their liver to pump air in and out of their lungs. A bird doesn't have that at all. In fact, the air in a bird lung, it goes in and out the nose, but when it gets to the lung part, it flows out the bottom and flows around the lung. There's no dead space in a bird lung. They can pull a lot more oxygen out of the air. So between their lung, their sternum, and their light bones, they can fly. This is amazing. The engineering challenges here are supreme. And yet birds are able to do that because of their lung. So think about the evolution of the lung. You're going to go for a reptile lung to a bird lung. The first thing you have to do is poke a hole in the bottom of the lung so the air can come out the bottom. Oh, whoops, you just killed your reptile. There's a giant difference here between the two lungs. Did birds evolve from dinosaurs? I don't believe in evolution, but even if I did, I would really struggle with this concept because of the challenges there. But I remember when I was a young man, I was firmly convinced that evolution was true. And I remember seeing pictures like this, the family tree of dinosaurs, going from all the dinosaurs all the way back in time throughout the whole Mesozoic era, all the way down to the bottom there, which is the common ancestor of all the dinosaurs. And I remember saying, evolution is a fact. I could see it right there in the fossil record. What I didn't know at the time, though, was that if you cover up all the dotted lines, there are actually 50 family sticks. 50 independent groups, lots of diversity within each group, and no missing links. There's no connecting lines between the groups. When the members of a group appear, they persist in the fossil record, and then they go extinct. And you can always identify a member and put it into one of these groups pretty easily. You've heard of the missing link between man and monkeys, right? No, there's missing links between almost every group of animal, almost every other group of animal, in fact, throughout the entire fossil record. That's the rule of thumb in the fossil record. The fossil record does not depict evolution. It depicts discontinuity. Now, I'm going to draw red lines on top of all these and shove them off to the side because I want to put the timing into context. That's all the data I just showed you. This is the range in the evolutionary model of all the mammals I just showed you and all the birds I just showed you. And I put a question mark after birds because we don't have many. I showed you almost all of them. I hardly showed you any of the mammals. There's tons of mammals. But look at that. The mammals go all the way through the dinosaur era. The birds go almost all the way through the dinosaur era. In fact, One of these bars in the upper left there, that was the bar that supposedly was the theropod group that evolved into birds. Now we find birds all the way at the base of that. So if birds evolved from dinosaurs, when? The evolutionists might have run out of time. Because what we find is we dig more and more and find more and more fossils. It's called range extension. When we find a group, their range tends to get deeper and deeper and deeper into the fossil record. And now we have all this overlap, and is there really any evidence of evolution? I do not think so. This one was on Science Magazine. This is a rhinoceros-sized mammal that they found in the Triassic. The Triassic is the first time period in the Mesozoic era. It goes Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. Oh, by the way, did you ever realize that almost all those dinosaurs in Jurassic Park are Cretaceous dinosaurs? Arg. No, don't ever ask me to watch a sci-fi movie with you. All right. I'm going to seriously try to end. I got 5 minutes. You got 5 minutes left in your brains? Everyone do this. Okay, we're going to race here. Did dinosaurs have feathers? Let's ask the question. First, this is the poster child of the feathered dinosaurs, Sinosauropteryx. They beat us over the head with this for over a decade. And it's got fuzzy. Can you see the fuzzes on his tail and down his back? Evidence of feathers. Remember what I said before? I don't care if it's feathers or not. I'm okay either way. Problem is, a skeptical evolutionist looked at this under a microscope and he says, wait a minute, I can see the animal's skin, and this fuzz is underneath the skin. And I quote, and it's obvious to anyone who looks. Why was it not obvious to the first group of scientists that looked? Because they really wanted to find evidence of feathered dinosaurs. This series of photos, the bottom one there, that's the wing of a turkey vulture. Strip away the feathers, that's the second picture from the bottom. You see all those bumps? Those are called quill knobs. A quill knob is a place where the feather is attached to the bone with a little muscle. So when birds fly, they erect their feathers when they make a turn or coming in for a landing, and they use little muscles to poke their feathers up. The same way that when you have goosebumps, your hair stand up. It's little muscles that do that. Well, in a bird, those muscles pulling on the bone make a little bump. Penguins don't have them. Ostriches don't have them. The actively flying birds do, most of them. The upper two pictures are an arm bone of a velociraptor. On the upper picture, there's a red rectangle. That's picture B. That's the second one down in gray. And can you see those little arrows? There's 6 little teeny arrows that are pointing at these little teeny bumps that I know you can't see. Because even if I get up close, you can barely see the bumps. These are supposedly quill knobs on a velociraptor arm bone. But if non-flying birds don't have quill knobs, and no one believed the velociraptor was flying, why would it have quill knobs even if it had feathers? So I just don't see it. Here's a picture of a bird wing, and you can see the feathers and where they attach. And yet consider, what's a scale? Where's a scale? Not like a fish scale, because you can scale a fish, right? A dinosaur scale is just a bump in his skin. Sometimes there's a bone underneath it, sometimes not. That's it. And so when a snake sheds, you get the snake skin, there's little thingies on there. Those are the scales. It's just a bump. A feather is more like a hair. A hair comes up out of a little hole in the skin. A feather is a hyper-complex hair because it's manufactured inside the skin, and when it pops out, it unfurls into a very complex structure. Feathers are cool. But if you had a feather, there would be a hole in your skin. There'd be a hole in your scales, and you should be able to see it. And we've got lots of fossils of dinosaur skins. Here's 3 different skin fossils from different parts of a Tyrannosaurus rex. No evidence of feathers, period. And yet, this is similar to the group that supposedly evolved into birds. So when you actually get a good fossil, you don't see evidence of it. Here's another problem. Almost all the feathered dinosaurs are coming from this one place in China. And one scientist has his name essentially on every paper. And the same scientist was caught up in a fiasco in the year 2000 where some villagers, because the scientists actually aren't finding the fossils, there's a cottage industry. These villagers, they're going through rocks and they're finding fossils because they realize if they find a world-class specimen, they can sell it for millions of dollars. And so they're selling it to the scientists. Scientists aren't collecting it themselves. Well, National Geographic had on the cover of their magazine in the year 2000, the feathered dinosaur. And it was a fraud. Someone had taken a dinosaur and a bird and glued the fossils together. There's an issue in archaeology called provenance. You can't put into a museum a specimen that you didn't dig out of the ground. You can't go to a curio shop and buy something and give it to the Louvre. They say, no, I don't care how good it looks, it's a fake. They just assume it's a fake. Problem with dinosaurs, big ones. Here's another one. Same author, a couple of years ago, comes out with the series of photos of feathers in amber. He did not collect these in the field. He bought these at a rock shop in Thailand. Ooh. And you can melt amber and stick things in amber and cool it off again. Ooh. But worse than that, okay, these are feathers. Let's assume this is a real specimen and no one faked it. How do we know they're not bird feathers? Because we saw all those beautiful feathers of birds in the fossil record. There's nothing like that we've ever found with dinosaurs. Why can't that be bird feathers? Because the evolutionist wants you to think that dinosaurs have feathers. And they're trying really hard to convince people of it. Okay, the end. If I can show you that dinosaur fossils cannot be millions of years old, evolution's not true. This is electron microscope pictures of the inside of a triceratops horn. It's not petrified. There are cells there. That middle on the right, those blobs with the spikes, those are osteoblasts. Those are bone cells. From that same formation, the first information we had was from a Tyrannosaurus rex. It still stank. Pew! It was still rotting. And inside of that bone, they found flexible tissue, blood vessels, red blood cells. For another specimen, scientists have found evidence of DNA inside dinosaur bones. Wait a minute. I'm the geneticist here. DNA doesn't last for millions of years. Period. I can say that authoritatively. All the information we've ever seen about DNA is a fragile molecule that breaks down very rapidly. This is non-petrified bone with DNA in it. Maybe they're not millions of years old. All right, go to creation.com for more information. Take a look at some of our books out there, like this one, Dire Dragons. Very interesting book. Just flip through there and look at the pictures. You'll be amazed. Consider Creation Magazine, which I'll give you an opportunity to sign up for a little later. Also, look at this little kid's book, Exploring Geology with Mr. Hibb. This is such a good seller. We wrote a second one called Exploring Dinosaurs with Mr. Hibb. Just a little cricket. He's going around. He's asking questions about rocks and minerals and fossils and dinosaurs. And there's some really good stuff in there. I'm going to leave you with that because we need to start the main church service in 10 minutes. Thank you all very much. I hope I encouraged. I hope I challenged. I hope I informed. See you in 10 minutes.